The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to Foodie Down Bronx. I'm your host, the Hungry Dominican. On this episode of the show, we are talking to Bronx Chef Millie Peartree about her fish fry and soul food restaurant. Ms. Peartree has gained some significant exposure nationwide after having been featured in the New York Times, and today she is here to share her story. So if you like to eat, stay tuned. From Bronx and to the world, this is Foodie Down Bronx. Welcome once again to the show, guys. Make sure you stay connected to us on Instagram at BronxNetTV, at Foodie Down Bronx, and make sure to follow me at The Hungry Dominican. Before we get to today's guest, let's dig into some Chew News. The Trump administration announced plans to roll back school lunch standards that were first introduced by former First Lady Michelle Obama with her Let's Move Healthy Living campaign. The new standards will allow schools more flexibility with their own lunch programs, allowing them to cut the number of vegetables served at lunch and limit the amount of fruits served at on-the-go breakfast meals. Critics of the move say that this will allow for schools to offer more unhealthy and greasier foods. Obama's school lunch program increased the requirements for fruits and vegetables in meals, cut trans fat, and reduced sodium levels in those same meals. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue said the new rollbacks were made to give schools more flexibility and to reduce waste. In 2019, the first comprehensive analysis of Michelle Obama's program did find evidence of food waste, but the levels were not substantially higher than food waste under previous lunch regulations. And to top it all off, the Trump administration announced the new proposals on Mrs. Obama's birthday. In other Trump food news, the Trump administration has been hit with a lawsuit over its plan to remove hundreds of thousands of recipients from food stamps. New York City is among the 14 states to join this lawsuit Thursday in order to block the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program rule, changes that would deny benefits to nearly 700,000 SNAP recipients. Here is the change. Current SNAP rules state that able-bodied adults without dependents can receive benefits for only 3 months unless they work or participate in a training program for at least 20 hours per week. However, states have had flexibility in being able to waive the 3-month time limit to ensure that people who are unable to find work in areas with a lack of jobs still have access to food stamps. Under the new rule, states can only obtain waivers if a county has a minimum unemployment rate of 6% rather than 2.5%. The lawsuit, which was filed by 14 states, including NYC, against the Department of Agriculture and Purdue, calls the rule changes arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, and otherwise not in accordance with the law. Furthermore, State Attorney General Letitia James tweeted, "Millions of people rely on SNAP to eat, and this new rule will have devastating impacts on New Yorkers and people across the country." All right, folks, that is this week's Chew News, giving you a little food for thought. Foodie Down Bronx, we'll be right back. Our guest today owned a beloved New York Times critically acclaimed restaurant here in the Bronx, and up until recently, she was unfortunately forced to shut down due to its negligence by the building owner. Joining us now is Chef Millie Peartree, owner of MP Fish Fry and Soul Food. Thank you, Chef.
Thank you for having me. Good day.
So happy you're here with me. You and I met recently. and we discussed your situation. So I want to give people a general overview of what happened. But before we do that, I just want to say that I got to know you, I guess, through your mac and cheese recipe that was featured in the New York Times. And then after I found out about that, everything sort of happened. This whole situation happened. So tell people a general overview of what happened to your restaurant here in the Bronx.
On November 22nd, 2019, I got a Con Edison representative came to my restaurant and asked me two questions. How long have you been here, and have you ever had any interruptions in gas services? The answers to those two questions were I was next door for 2 years, and I was in my newly renovated space for approximately 8 months up until that date. The second answer to the question was, have I had any interruptions in gas service, which was no. Immediately, the representative said, you know, we're going to have to shut down the gas to the entire building, hang tight. We proceeded with the day. I showed the Con Edison representative a series of spaces within my facility, where they were looking for individual shut-off valves. During that time, they did carbon monoxide tests in my restaurant, found no leakage of gas. He walked out, came back in, said I'm gonna have a supervisor. Throughout that process, I called my property manager, advised them that the Con Edison was gonna shut the gas off. They needed access to my previous location, which is literally next door. And then around 3:57 p.m. after further investigation, they advised me that they had to shut the gas off to the entire building.
And at that moment, how long had you been in business in that new location?
The new location, I was there approximately 8 months.
8 months. And that was your first brick and mortar for your restaurant. You had no other, besides the one that was right next door, you had no other previous locations.
No.
Those were your two previous locations in the Bronx.
Correct.
So you were forced to shut down. Needless to say, that affected your business right away. Did they give you a timeline of when things were going to go back to normal, or were you sort of left up in the air wondering when this could end?
Well, being a restaurateur and you try to do some preliminary research prior to opening, I've always came to that conclusion that I would never want to build out a restaurant fully because of those small things, and one in particular, well, not necessarily small, which, that could be relative, but, I know gas takes a long time. So whether or not, you build out from the bottom up, one thing you have no control over is the city portion of it. So even if you work with the best contractors, engineers, architects, plumbers, no one ever has control over the final say-so, which is Con Edison, energy services, and when gas will be shut back on. So instantly I knew when Con Edison said at 3:57 p.m., well, my flames went out, when the gas actually went off, I knew that this was going to be an indefinite process, and immediately I made the final call to my property manager and said, we need to have a conversation as it pertains to this.
Right. So let's move backwards a little bit, and we'll of course come right back to the situation at hand. But I want to go back to the origins of you being a chef, of you finding your sort of calling in life, which was food. Earliest memory of you wanting to be a chef, of your love of food, when was that?
I remember possibly cracking my first egg around 6 or 7 years old.
Okay.
I've always had this affinity and passion for cooking since a young age, and as I, grew up, I've always cooked. I was the person that cooked in church, and I wanted to go to culinary school, but my mom said that I'm not going to pay for something you already know how to do. But it was something that followed me in college. My apartment was a hangout spot because people already knew Millie had something frying, baking, or cooking.
She was making the food.
Absolutely, yep.
That's awesome. And so you didn't go to culinary school?
I did not.
You did not. So you have no culinary official background.
Correct.
But still. When we first met, we spoke about the type of food that you offer. We touched upon it briefly, that there was a lack of that type of food, or enough of that type of food in the Bronx.
Correct.
Fish fry, soul food type stuff. Is that one of the reasons that you felt it was necessary to open up MP, because that food was not offered enough in the Bronx, and too many people maybe left the borough to find what you offered?
Well, that was partially the reason. I mean, I cooked and catered, and I was a private chef for a short period of time as well. But when I found the location, it was just at random. Like, I saw for rent sign and said, hey, this is the way that I can invest in myself and give back to my community. And the other part does ring true to what you suggested, was the concept of the style of food, was, as far in between as it pertains to that cuisine of food in the borough of the Bronx. You know, there's a lot in outer boroughs, but not necessarily in the borough. So I said, why not bring something that I've grew up on, something that I've always utilized throughout my childhood, growing up in the catering world, and bring something a little bit different to the Bronx.
And how was the reception when you opened?
Day one, it was an instant success.
Really?
Yes.
So the neighborhood, I'm sure they were thankful that you were there. They were happy that you were there. And with that, you know, with everything that's going on now, with your spot being closed, and that initial reception of everyone loving it, it's how have you been able to survive all of this? Because, you know, I know a lot of small business owners. I know it's difficult. I can never, you know what it is to walk in their shoes, but I do understand that it causes a lot of, you know, stress a lot of these times. And so your situation actually happened right before Thanksgiving.
Correct.
And it, of course, went through, you know, the Christmas holiday and New Year's. How have you been feeling since that moment? I mean, I know you've been feeling, you know, horrible, but how has it been for you?
I mean, it's been very difficult, you know, not necessarily only for myself, you know, but for the tenants of the building as well. You know, they had to go through, you know, all of the holidays with nothing. And, you know, I just feel like it's an inhumane portion of it where, you know, the building and the property manager could have done a little bit more. Like, I do understand that they offered them some hot plates, you know, but we all know that you cannot prepare a full-on meal, especially if you have a family, on a hot plate. You know, they could have totally catered for these people. You know, they constantly boast about what they do for their other buildings, you know, like they talk about, you know, hell, Thanksgiving and Christmas come around, we give turkey-style porters and supers, but hey, what about, you know, your tenants in the Bronx? You know what I mean? Like, you know, you displaced a business, you know, you could have offered me one of your prime real estate locations and said, hey, Millie, you know, we can move you somewhere where you could possibly make even more money. And it's not even that case. It's like, you know what, I do love the Bronx. You know what I mean? But during that time, it's like, you know what, we can kind of supplement your income a little bit by hiring you to cater for these people.
Right.
You know, secondly, you know, small business are the backbone of our community. It's not the big box retailers. You know, we're the ones that actually provide jobs. And one of the things I love the best is like I was able to provide jobs for people in the community. You know, so it's like, so when you take something away, you know, it does something to your soul. It's like, you know, it's, I feel like I let people down. You know, I did everything I was supposed to do as it pertains to insurance.
I know it's hard.
You do everything that you're supposed to do, you know, as a good business person.
Right.
And
You do everything by the books, you do everything
Correct.
straight line,
Correct.
and you're hoping for the best. And I do want to point out that your restaurant is part of a residential building, so the entire
Correct.
building was affected, which is why you're referencing the fact that the tenants there, they were forced to live without the gas as well, and so the management company gave them hot plates, which of course is not enough to properly, you know, make a meal for an entire family. So everyone was essentially affected. It wasn't just your business.
Correct.
And you know, like I said, I saw it when we first met. You know, you have such a passion for what you do, and it breaks my heart to know that your heart's broken because you wear your heart on your sleeve. You know, and which I think it's a lovely attribute, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But I can only imagine how difficult this was. But in turn, you've become sort of an advocate for the people in your building. You're offering them so much of your help because a lot of them maybe just don't understand the specifics about, you know, what's really going on, or they don't understand what the next steps should be, considering that they're not living without gas. So you've sort of become like, you know, the one that represents them.
Absolutely.
How have they been feeling as well? I mean, since you've gotten close to the people who live in that building, what stories have they been sharing with you about this whole situation?
Well, even before this incident happened, which isn't isolated, because you know this has happened to the building before, having the gas shut off due to, you know, working without permits and illegal gas plumbing work, et cetera, which you can totally find on the Department of Building website. But you know, overall, I'm the type of, you know, entrepreneur that I have a connection with whoever walks in my establishment, because you know, you have those conversations on a day-to-day basis. You know, I saved my last $20 to come here, and that's something that you appreciate because people work hard for their money, and it's like, you know, they're actually bringing a part of them within your restaurant. So a lot of the tenants did patronize the restaurant over the years. And, you know, the way I feel like, you know, I have to do, it's a disservice not to do something for them. You know, a lot of people aren't equipped with some of the wonderful relationships that I've been able to foster throughout the years. So initially, my first course of action was to call Congressman Adriana Esfal's office because, you know, they were a great, you know, as well as being in the community, they were down the street from us, but you know what, they patronized the business as well. And I said, you know what, this is what your elected officials are for, you know what I mean? Because I didn't have all the answers. Like, this has never happened to me. However, I said, you know what, let's work with the city somehow, some way to kind of get some answers. So subsequently, you know, speaking with their office, you know, Maximo Javier, you know, the manager of the office, he said, you know, Millie, I don't see any complaints here, like what's going on? He said, you know, if no one says anything, there's nothing that we can do. So instantaneously, I spoke with the tenants and I was like, you guys have to call 311. And subsequent to that, you know, they were able to do further investigation, our congressman's office. And, you know, they sent another DOB inspector out to make sure, you know, things were exactly the way Con Edison labeled it as, you know, everything is shut off and everything is safe.
Right.
You know, and then throughout the course of that communication with them, you know, I was able to, you know, have Bronx, another television network come out and do an interview. And then subsequently, New York Times came out and did an interview online and a full page in the Metro section. Right. And, you know, it's just one of those things, like, we have to bring awareness to this.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, I think that there'll be more of a public outrage if there were, you know, casualties, you know, but in this instance, it's like, you know, since no one died, we're kind of just going to brush it off like we're going to work, but no one's really looking at the bigger picture of what potentially could have happened.
Sure, I understand that. It's fascinating. All right, guys, don't go anywhere. We will be right back with more Foodie Down Bronx. Welcome back to Foodie Down Bronx. I'm your host, the Hungry Dominican. We're continuing our discussion with Chef Millie Peartree. Chef, going back to what you had said in the other segment about the management company and how, you know, if it seems if everyone survives it, then it's no sort of big deal, and they'll keep promising that they'll keep fixing the situation. I feel personally that, and maybe you share this view with me, maybe not, is it because you think it's an outer borough situation? Because we're in the Bronx, that a management company could say, yeah, we'll fix whatever the situation is, and then just continuously take month after month after month. Do you think that's maybe the case?
I absolutely feel that that's the case. You know, in my opinion, you know, the disenfranchisement happens, you know, several times, you know, throughout the course of these not isolated incidents. You know, as you look at Stellar Properties Management's Instagram page, you know, you'll see over and over again how they boast about their Brooklyn properties, their Brooklyn cafes, and everything under the sun. But, you know, when it comes to Bronx and my situation and the tenant situation in particular, you know, they issue blanket statements. You know, we take the safety of our, you know, tenants, say blah, 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 blah. Number one, they're not addressing the small business at hand. You know, they actually view my Instagram page frequently, you know. They look at my Instagram story frequently, you know, but they can never reply to an email or phone call, you know. So I just feel like overall, you know, if this was Brooklyn, you know, and they recently got a deal for Upper West Side, you know, complex, I think it's like $83.5 million, you know, they'll pay attention to that, you know, as it pertains to their violation of Local Law 152 that requires buildings, you know, once a year, every 5 years for older buildings and once a year for newer buildings every up to 10 years to get their gas pipes inspected. You know, I feel as if they knew that they had leaky pipes. You know, I feel like there's a lot of preventative things that they could have put in place.
Sure.
But they chose to neglect it because ultimately this was the inevitable. Like, this was going to happen anyway, as it pertains to the other leaks and other issues that they had in the building.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I know for a fact in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, there would have been no illegal gas activity in place. But again, because we're the Bronx, you get away with certain things.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, they try to fly under the radar. as much as possible because they don't care.
Right, right. Which, again, I share that that thought as well. It feels like it's very dismissive. Whatever problems we might go through here in the Bronx, it's, whoever's on top tends to dismiss a lot of our problems. And when it comes to building management, then it's exactly what you're dealing with. Now, I was never fortunate enough to go into your restaurant. First time we met, we were at the restaurant, which it's not open, of course, but everything was pretty much there. You had your cash registers, you had it set up. And what I loved in that moment of talking to you was that there were so many people that walked in, and so many people were brokenhearted. Yeah. And you had some folks that I felt had never been there, and then folks that had definitely been there before. Right. And so it felt like a very communal space. It felt like something that, had it survived, would have been so beneficial to that community. Because food is life, food is conversation, food is connection. What was the vibe in your restaurant? Because besides being a success, was it that place where you felt was communal, where people came together? You had mentioned to me that since you're so close, or you were close to a funeral home, you had people who would, have to go through a funeral service, and then they would just like jet right to your spot, and that just painted this picture in my head of like a meeting spot. Right. Was that the vibe at your restaurant?
I mean, it totally was. It's kind of like Cheers. You go someplace where everybody knows your name, like the regulars. Like I had customers, twice a week, faithfully. They'll sit in the same location. You have the conversation about what did you do today, and new people that come there, like I heard about it, and people that actually move out of the borough, that they come back. Like I had this one young lady, like she moved to Staten Island, and she still continues to come once a month. There was a granddaughter and grandfather, they came from Poughkeepsie. So, people, I mean, the old saying rings true, people travel for good food, but I think outside of the good food, it was a place of, warmth and hospitality, and people wanted to come because they knew that, there's a business owner that's actually there, which majority of the time doesn't happen, and people actually care. Like, for example, when you mentioned funeral home and, getting to know newer patrons, one day I was speaking with this woman, and I was like, hey, how was your day? And she burst into tears, and she said, you know what, thank you so much for asking me that, because no one asked me how my day was. And I think that she felt like it was genuine. It wasn't the overall, how's your day, and I really don't care. It's like, if I ask you how your day is, especially if you're going to wait a couple minutes for food, tell me how your day is. I honestly do care.
Yeah, I felt like it was just a very warm place when it was open. And also, it's very important to point out that it was also a Black-owned business, which is something that, it's already difficult enough to get into the business market, whatever you're doing, and then to be a person of color, and then deal with, whatever that throws at you. It's rather difficult. I want to go back to your catering days, because you still do catering. I mean, you are still out there doing your thing for sure. Where did you start?
I think my first catering job was for church. So I think I was probably like maybe 19, 20 years old. Okay. And then I remember another one. I think I was freshly out of college. My friend Terrence asked me to come down to Maryland to do something with him. He was hosting something. So I remember as far back as, my late teens, early 20s, when I started to cater. And then when it became bigger, I can't necessarily remember my first event, but I remember my biggest event was catering for Delta Airlines. Like they had, what they do is they partner with another company where they actually build playgrounds. So I did a lot of their pro-social catering. And I remember it was a 300-person breakfast and lunch here in the Bronx. And they actually build out playgrounds with a company called Kaboom. So that was one of my most challenging on a larger scale. However, the rewards were greater because they hired me again to do it. And, it's kind of like been a thing, when they come to New York, if they build out a playground, they'll call Millie and things of that nature. And then they did another event called Holiday in the Hangar, where, they take inner city children, they put them on an airplane, they let them ride around the tarmac for a little while. And then when they open up into, one of the hangars, it's the North Pole.
Right.
Or the South Pole. What is it? Where's Santa Claus at? North Pole. I got it right the first time.
And so how was it when you were featured in the New York Times? How did that come about? Because I always get a kick when the New York Times comes to the Bronx. I love it.
Well, I was featured first as a critic's pick before the recipe.
Critic's pick.
Critic's pick,
So outline that relationship you have with the New York Times, which, you know, it's the most revered, I think, newspaper in the world.
Let me tell you something. I've always wanted to be written about in the New York Times. I think it's like one of those, you know, I think the only thing that's next for me is to win a James Beard Award.
Right.
You know, but it's like when you actually see, you know, someone come up and they actually, you know, look at the smaller restaurants. I mean, you know, when you look at the New York Times, you're always looking at like the Pete Wells articles,
Yes.
you know, where he's actually critiquing.
By the way, Pete Wells, a well-known New York Times food critic, is a huge fan of yours.
Yes, he likes my collard greens.
I gotta shout that out.
Yes, Mr. Pete Wells, and he's the sweetest guy, and Sam Sifton and everybody over at the Food Desk, like they're amazing people, and you know, and I necessarily didn't even feel nervous when I actually met them in office the first time. I think I was a little bit more, I felt this sense of pride when I was told that, you know, someone's gonna come up to the restaurant and they did a story, and it was like, this is pretty awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I was actually proud of myself because, you know, you question yourself throughout business, throughout the years, like, am I doing this right? And I always have conversations with my chef friends, you know, as it pertains to like quality of food and things of that nature. And I used to be very hard on myself. And one thing I always told myself over and over again is like, you know, this is the restaurant business. Everybody's not gonna like what you do. I mean, you know, even like I see like some not necessarily nice comments, but you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion. You know, and I think that's one of the risks that happens when you eat outside of home is, you know, you're not gonna necessarily like something. I mean, there's times I go to restaurants, I don't necessarily like something, but you know, you just don't go back. But, you know, in this instance, it was like, you know, the New York Times came out and these like food people, like they eat from all over the world. They could have went anywhere else, but they came to my restaurant, and to be a critic's pick was something that was amazing.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Congrats on that.
Thank you.
I do want to point out that, you know, you've been going through what you've been going through. Your current location has been shut down since November 22nd, correct? But thankfully, you have found a new location, and some more information will be announced in the future. But pertaining to that location, you do have a GoFundMe to have folks help you out with getting that spot up and running as fast as possible, because I know a lot of people are missing it. Because again, I really loved being at your spot and just having people come in, and you could see it in their eyes. They were just, they love your food and they love your energy. So I do want to point out that you will be back soon. Your brick and mortar will be back soon in the Bronx. And once again, you'll announce more information on your social. So guys, make sure to stay connected with the chef and find out how you can help Millie Peartree's Fish Fry and Soul Food local by checking out her bio on Instagram at Chef Millie Peartree. Chef, we wish you the best of luck with everything. Thank you for sharing your story with me. I know you're going to be back on your feet, and you're going to be doing it.
Thank you for having me.
Rocking that hardcore. Guys, thank you. That's all for the show. Thank you again for tuning in, and thank you to my guests for joining me today. Tune in every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. here on BronxNet, Optimum 67 and FiOS 33. Also, remember to tune in on the go at bronxnet.org and find clips of the show on YouTube. From BronxNet to the world, this is Foodie Down Bronx. I'm your host, M, the Hungry Dominican, always reminding you to feed your mind, feed your body, and if you see me coming along, feed me. Adios.